U.S. Congresswoman Gwen Moore was arrested yesterday in Milwaukee along with some other demonstrators who were rallying for higher fast food wages. Congresswoman Moore was reportedly handcuffed with zip ties. She was one of about 36 demonstrators gathered in front of a McDonald's near the Miller Brewers Stadium. They were arrested for blocking traffic.
Representative Gwen Moore should be honored and applauded for putting herself on the line, doing civil disobedience in the great tradition of Martin Luther King, standing up for an issue that is crucially important, that we raise people's wages to a decent living wage in this country instead of poverty wages that are prevailing for so many millions of Americans. And it's a great tradition in this country dating way back to Thoreau, that people are willing to risk arrest for a cause that they believe in and do so nonviolently. So I think she's a model.
What do you think about the arrest first, Kevin?
You know, I don't have a problem with the fact that she was out there protesting and blocking traffic, and I'm glad that the police did their job, which was to ensure the roads were cleared. And it was apparently a nonviolent civil disobedience event, and she got arrested for it along with a number of other people. And that's Matt's right about one thing, and that is that goes way back. While I've never been arrested during a civil disobedience engagement, I've participated in my share of protests, as I'm sure Matt has. I know Matt has, actually. He probably didn't know I have, but I actually saw something on Facebook last night, and I texted to a friend of mine that if some of my employees had been out behaving the way some of these people were, even if they were behaving civilly, so to speak, they wouldn't be employed by me by the end of the next day, probably 10 minutes after they walked into the office. And I mean that in all candor and sincerity.
President Obama says, let's do that $10 an hour. Kevin, is that reasonable?
You know, why limit it at 10? Why not make it 20 or 25 or 30? And then the people who are making $30 an hour right now, you know, $60,000 a year, then they should have their wages increased to $100,000 to make it fair and equal. You know, if people don't like the jobs they have, they need to find different jobs. They need to increase and improve their educational opportunities. They need to engage in networking, the types of things that small business people glom onto to go and hire people. It's the big, huge companies, the fast food restaurants, and some of the huge retailers which typically are providing these minimum wage or low wage jobs, and they are typically supposed to be part-time, and they are typically intended not to be providing for entire families, especially raising children. I think largely that this whole strike movement, this whole raise the minimum wage movement, like so many things on the left, is really a drummed up, ginned up effort by groups like SEIU and others that are trying to gain political points during a heated election year. It's very common and very typical, and we faced it 2 years ago, and we'll face it 2 years from now during the presidential race.